In this video, I'm going to start a lesson series of videos that address how to execute the routines in Unit 7, Day 24, Lesson 12C, completing the square visually. There are two routines in this lesson: contemplate, then calculate, and connecting representations. These are two routines that you may not have used before. Typically, two routines is a lot for one lesson if it's in just a single period. But we wanted to give you the opportunity to see these different routines and make choices around how to execute them. You can choose to use both routines if you have a longer period. You can split them up over multiple days, or you can just choose to use one of them for this topic. The first time you're going over a new routine in class, a lot for some extra time to teach students the routine. So that's what's going to lead to this lesson being even longer than you would anticipate it to be. So again, you can pick and choose what you use and what makes sense for your students. So the first routine within this lesson, the goal of this lesson is how can we use a visual to help us complete the square to solve some quadratic equations. And you'll see there's two different kind of ways students can start thinking about this. And the first part is the launch, where we have the contemplate then calculate routine. If students are working asynchronously, then they can just kind of answer on the slide the way that they would, the way that it's presented here. However, I went ahead and created a Desmos lesson for this that you can, I'll show you how you can execute this synchronously. So a big part of both of these routines is kind of pacing students and ensuring that they're only on certain parts of it. So I'm actually going to pace just for students to be on screen one for right now. And so if I were I'm going to kind of just model how I would start off this routine, how I would present it to students, and then I'll show you some student responses that you might get. Okay, so I might not even allow students to move on through this. I might just, let's open it up for the 3 slides. Okay, so Unit 7, Day 24, completing the square visually. How can we use a visual to help us complete the square to solve some quadratic equations? So to start off this lesson, we're going to use the contemplate then calculate routine. It's different than maybe typical launches in the past where you would answer a question first and then we would talk about it. In this space, I want us to kind of go along together and go slide by slide together. So the way this routine works is first you contemplate and you think, and then you calculate and use mathematical reasoning. So can I have somebody read the what? Practice looking for calculation shortcuts using what you know about the way numbers and area work. Great. And then can I have somebody use the why? Read us the why. To think like mathematicians, to find calculation shortcuts using mathematical structures. So here's where I'm teaching students the routine itself. So in contemplate then calculate, we're going to notice, then we're going to find a shortcut, then we're going to share and study strategies, and then we're going to reflect on learning. So in a moment, I'm going to flash something on the screen. I just want you to think about what you notice about that image. Okay, so then you would go ahead and ask yourself what might be mathematically important within that image while you're noticing. You're going to go ahead and you're just going to show them this image. And notice how every time I'm opening up the slide on here for the pacing, I'm really using pacing. They're going to take a moment to look. And then typically I'm going to stop the pacing and I'm just going to paste them here. Oops, sorry. So I just want them on this slide. What do you notice about those images? So you gave them that time to think about it. Now they're going to share what they noticed without looking at the images. What do they remember? What stood out to them? And so if I go to teacher, you can start getting student responses. I noticed that there are 3 rectangles and 1 rectangle with 4 squares missing. I noticed 2 of the rectangles have the same width and 2 have the same length. I noticed they're different colors. I noticed there's 4 squares missing in 1 of the images. I noticed all of them together makes 1 big square. So after gathering the responses, it's checked off that students will see one another's responses they can view, and you might screenshot a couple of them to feature with the class, and those would go in the snapshot section. Or you can just kind of look here together and just share out some of the key ones. Either kids can unmute if they have a tendency to unmute, or you can kind of just highlight some ideas that, oh, interesting, if you push them all together, they all make a big square. It's a 10 by 10 square, if anyone notice that, and there's 4 missing here. So they almost make a big square. Interesting. Okay. So we're going to share out. So that's when we would share out. You can use this slide here. I noticed, what did you notice? Again, this might look different for different classes. Maybe they are going to share aloud like I just said, or maybe you're going to read the responses. So on the next slide, you'll show them this and you'll give them a couple minutes to, just like a minute, 30 seconds to think about a calculation shortcut they could use to find the number of total small squares in their head. And be prepared to explain why the strategy works. So give them a minute or two. You might even just paste them on here to look at this and really think about it. The nice thing about pasting is it keeps them with you. So if somebody didn't finish this and they're trying to tweak their answer, it's okay, we're moving on. So it helps them to not spend too long on one question, the way maybe you would encourage students to move on in class. Okay, so then you're going to give them time and space to go ahead and answer this. So this is the student view. I noticed, so I knew, so I, my strategy works because. So now, and I'm going to make it bigger. So students have some time to answer these questions, and then they'll share with the class, and when they share with the class, they'll see a couple of other responses. And here are some sample responses you might get. Somebody might actually say, I pushed them together, I found 10 by 10, and then I subtracted 4, and I got 96, right? And the reason we're doing this, right, is pushing students to think about completing the square. How many are missing to make this into a square? Because that's what we're going to do with algebra tiles in the next part of the lesson. And then another student, this student saying just push those together, and then push these together. And then find the area of this one, and then add those 5 on, right? There'll be a bunch of different strategies. I think something that you want to really emphasize is the students who said, I knew this was a square, it was just 4 missing, right? Because that's where we're going to get into completing. Sorry, I knew this whole thing was a big square with just 4 missing, and that's how it's going to help us get into completing the square, but also just seeing that this corner one is a square with 4 missing. So how many little pieces would we need to complete this square? You can use that language to get them to think about it. What would we need to complete this square to make it a square? 4 little units. Okay. So once you and then you would wrap up this launch, take them here, and students can go ahead and just answer the reflection questions. And this is something that you don't have to discuss as a whole group. They'll see one another's responses, and they'll have a chance to either reflect on one of the 2 questions. And so overall, this routine is going to get students to just think about what does it mean to complete the square visually, and how can this set them up for success in the next part of and it is setting them up for success in the next part of the lesson when we're going to complete the square using algebra tiles. Okay.